Are you looking to get ready, be prepared, and transform your financial future? Then you've come to the right place. This is the Get Ready Money podcast with Tony Stewart, where Tony has insightful conversations with financial experts who are changing the way we think about money. Catch up on the latest financial trends and hear practical advice from Tony and his expert guests so you can build healthy habits that work. Be empowered with tips for implementing small changes that can have a big impact on your financial future. So sit back and get ready to hear from today's guest.
Welcome to the Get Ready Money podcast, changing the way we think about money. I'm pleased to be joined today by Dr. Bryan Jepson. Bryan is a financial advisor and emergency medicine physician. In this episode, we'll be discussing Bryan's insights on how we change the way we think about money and special needs planning. Bryan, welcome to the Get Ready Money podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate the invite, and it's fun to be here.
Fantastic. We'll look forward to getting into this with you. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story?
Well, how far back do you want to go?
Well, maybe not too far.
Okay. Well, so I'm a physician. I'm an emergency medicine physician. This will be 2025 is my 30th year anniversary of medical school graduation, to let everybody know how ancient I am. That was back in the 1990s when I graduated, or the 1900s, excuse me. So I've had a long career in medicine. It's been fulfilling. I've enjoyed it. But like many doctors, as they age, they, are kind of looking for some other things to do. And I found myself, although I enjoyed medicine, as I approached the twilight years of my career, I would say I'm kind of tired of working in medicine, but not tired of working. And so I tried to figure out what would be my next step. And, as I look at things that I enjoy and that I'm passionate about, try to figure out if I could turn any of those into a second career. And I have always enjoyed personal finance and investing. So I jumped in to some more educational stuff on that, went got a master's degree in finance. Tried to figure out within finance what would be interesting to me, and realized that I think because maybe of what I've done as a career prior to that is that financial planning is a good fit, where I could meet with other families and other people and continue to develop relationships and help and coach and do all the things that you do as a physician, but just with a different subject matter. So I went and got the certified financial planning certification in education, and joined a company called Targeted Wealth Solutions and have been working with them for the last few years.
Fantastic. Well, and being an ER physician is not an easy task by any means. So, I'm just curious, do you feel that there's a crossover between medicine and financial planning? Are you able to use some of the skills you developed?
It's an interesting question, and because all my prior history before recently has been medicine, biology. I hadn't taken a business class. I mean, I think I took one business class in college, and it was in basic economics. So when I jumped into finance, it was foreign, but at the same time, it feels very comfortable as a financial planner. I have all the information that I need, the education that I need on finance, but because of my experience in medicine, I just feel very comfortable in this setting because, as a doctor, your role is basically an educator, right? So you're taking complex information, you're gathering data, you're breaking it down into a way that the patient can understand. You're acting as a fiduciary, all the things that we should be doing as financial planners as well, you do as a physician. And so I have 30 years of experience communicating with people, and in the ER, you have to do it quickly. You have to create that trust relationship very quickly and gather that information and hopefully help improve their health. And so, I'm still a health advisor. It's just now about financial health. But for me, it was very smooth and comfortable.
Well, that's awesome. And I think that's something I use analogies oftentimes to doctors is, for example, like if somebody walks in for a hip replacement, doctors don't tell them the history of hip replacements
Right.
and everything, they just give them more of a short answer about, what it actually entails, what's really going on with it, rather than, in the financial field, as we oftentimes overwhelm people with a bunch of information they
Yeah.
don't really need.
Yeah. No, that's definitely true. It's important to it's important to know your client. I think that's the most important thing. Some clients really want that information, and that's something that they enjoy the learning process, and others want hands off. And they just say, I trust you. I want you to manage it for me. But I found that with physicians in particular, physicians are driven and curious people, and I think that they want to be good stewards of their medicine, of their finances. Um, and so I appreciate a collegial back and forth with that, where I can help educate them and not, because most of them don't want me to just do it
Mhm.
completely. They want to, and if they do, they want to at least know what they're doing, and I appreciate that. And even with patients, it works better if it's a team approach, right? Where you're both moving in the same direction because you understand why.
I think that's something really important to highlight, that it's a team approach with your client. It's not just telling them what to do. And I think that is something, that you work on as a physician. And, with the medical field, is that, the best care is when it is something that's agreed on, where,
Yeah.
you don't feel as a patient that the doctor just said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then you're like, wait a minute, what? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and it's changed. Medicine used to very much be kind of paternalistic like that, where it's I'm the doctor, do what I say. It's not that way anymore, and it's better not to be that way. We talk about shared responsibility because there's only so much you can do as an advisor, whether it's a physician or a financial advisor. The your client or your patient needs to take some ownership of that, and they have things that they need to do on their part of it. So um, a team approach is the way to go, definitely.
Yeah. I think that's so important for advisors to think about, that it needs to be a team approach. And I think that's important for clients to understand too, is that it needs to be a team approach, because then everybody gets the best results.
Right.
But you as a client also have to be curious,
Yeah,
and ask questions. Otherwise, you're going to find that you get products that you're not happy with long term. So
exactly.
that's
That's
wonderful
the best
advice.
way to really feel like I think is the best way to be able to trust your advisor, honestly, is
Yeah.
to have some background information and education so that you know that what your advisor is doing makes sense and is in your best interest, and that you can move forward with that person and be comfortable with kind of the direction that you're going.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. And I spent some time doing litigation consulting and some work with the California Department of Insurance. And oftentimes, what I would see is that it wasn't always ill intent in some of these cases. I mean, there's definitely predators and bad actors out there, but a lot of times it was just the client not fully
Yeah.
understanding and being part of the process and thinking that they were buying something other than what they were buying.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem. So, let's talk about special needs planning. It's,
Sure.
definitely where I first discovered you, is talking about special needs planning. Why are you passionate about special needs planning?
Well, it's because I'm part of that community of families who have special needs. So I have two adult children now that are have a disability. They both have autism, and so from the very beginning, as a family who's dealing with that, you're kind of forced to be fighters. And you become immediate advocates for your kids. And you have to be because, it's getting the information out. I mean, the information is not always immediately accessible, right? So you have to go in and gather it. And some of the services that are provided are not, or at least that are expressed, are not always everything that you have available. And so you learn very quickly that if you don't fight for your kids, no one else is going to. And so I think as a community, we all gather around that and have shared experience and have a soft spot for others who are in the community, whether you know them or not. And and most of the people that I know that are in that community are very good about helping others along the path. And so that's what my wife and I have tried to do. Early on in my career, I did, as we were kind of learning about autism and learning about the medical side of it, I did do some autism medicine, helping with kids with autism and some of their biomedical needs. But now that I became a financial planner, I knew that there's a big need in the community for people who have an understanding about all the nuances and the landmines and everything that are out there for financing your kids' life, and you have to plan for not just you, but also, or your retirement, but also their entire life. So it's really a 2-generational plan. So I just felt compelled to add that to my practice.
Yeah, well, that's great. And, I can identify with some of that is my son has type 1 diabetes, and,
Mhm.
we had a very strong parent community, especially when they're kids, about learning how to advocate,
Yeah,
for your kid is, because with schools and
right,
other things, there's a lot doesn't happen as you would hope that it would
right,
happen.
right. Yeah, you really have to be on top of it as a parent. And that can be challenging because you're also just trying to deal with the caregiving. And
Hmm.
so it's hard to do it all, and it can be lonely and isolating, and there's a lot that goes into it on the family side, and not just for the parents but other siblings and for the individual with disability themselves. So it's an important area to focus, and more people. I hope more people continue to get involved in it, and
That's
not out of
awesome.
necessity, not out of necessity.
Yeah, definitely not. It's not anything I'd wish on anyone else. So, how can advisors support their clients who have family members with special needs?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a couple ways, and one is to know what you don't know. So if you don't really know the information from special needs, then either refer them to someone who does, or try and go gather the information yourself. I went and got there's a special needs certificate. It's called a Chartered Special Needs Planner that I got from the American College of Financial Services. And that takes, well, I mean, I did it in about 3 months, and that's probably faster than most, but I kind of had enough background information that I could get through it pretty quickly. But if you do that, then you can provide great service for them and really help them to answer the questions. And if not, then I think you should understand that somebody else could probably help them better than you might be able to, and so refer them out.
Well, that's awesome. And I think that's such important advice, for anyone and everyone, no matter what you do, is, to understand your scope of expertise and to stay within it. Um, I learned that I was a wilderness first responder, and that was something that, we had to be very clear on is what actions we could take and, when it needed to be passed on to somebody with a higher, I guess I'm trying to remember the correct word, but, with a more advanced scope of expertise is,
Right.
what are
Yeah,
areas that,
that happens a lot in the medical field, right? Where when you understand that a patient needs something beyond what you can give, you refer to a specialist. I think the same can be true in financial planning.
Yeah, and maybe that's something financial planning needs, because I was something as a wilderness first responder, the line was very clear with exactly what we could do
Yeah.
and what we couldn't do. So, and we had a little more flexibility because if you're in the wilderness,
Right.
we could
Yeah. Sometimes you had
oftentimes
to do it.
be much more than 24 hours away from advanced medical care.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but it was still very clear lines. And I think in financial services that there aren't the clear lines.
Yeah.
It's
They're
that's
blurry.
great advice. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. So, just one of the big things I think that people don't know much about and a great tool are able accounts. Can you share with us what is an able account?
Yeah, sure. So, Enable account is essentially a, a I don't want to say a bank account because it's not administered by a bank, but it's a asset account that you can create for someone with special needs, where they can access it, where fairly easily to help meet their needs or lifestyle, or education needs, or really pretty much anything that goes to making their life better. In fact, ABLE stands for Achieve a Better Life Experience, and it was created as an act in 2014, I believe, and then ABLE accounts started showing up in about 2016. Now, pretty much every state has them. It is administered by the state, similar to a 529 plan. In fact, a lot of them are kind of part of 529 plans, but it's different than the educational plan. There are some different rules. But basically, what it does is allow you to um, grow some assets that will not preclude you from government funding. So, as of right now, if you're disabled, the individual with disability in your family has more than $2,000 in assets to their name, they no longer qualify for SSI, or Medicaid. And so that is that, and that's a lifeline for people with disabilities. And so, and honestly, it's hard to keep them under $2,000. I mean, that value hasn't changed since 1970 when it was first established. And so in today's money, $2,000 hardly is anything. But it's still, a strict limit in terms of funding from government. And so Enable account allows you to bypass that and still save money, invest that money for your child or adult with disability, where they can access it and use it. And so it's similar to a special needs trust in lots of ways, but it's easier to administer. You don't need a trustee. You can have a debit card, so the person who's the beneficiary of that account has a lot more immediate access to that money for a wider variety of things. And so it's a really good system now to have that option, because it allows just a lot more flexibility in spending.
Definitely. Yeah. And I was surprised, that my son was able to qualify as someone with type 1 diabetes. So I think that's also something that's important for people. If you do have a child or family member who has, I guess, probably anything that qualifies under the American with Disabilities Act
Yeah.
may possibly be able to get an ABLE account.
Yeah. Yeah. You would want them to be qualified. If they're not qualified and they're not on SSI, or you don't anticipate them going on SSI or getting Medicaid, then it's probably not as important, because they can just do their own investment account or checking account or whatever. But the real value in the ABLE account is it preserves your government benefit access, for SSI and Medicaid. And so that's really the key. And so if you qualify for Medicaid or SSI, then an ABLE account gives you a lot more flexibility.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing about that. So, one other question, to go back to physicians is, one of the things is, financial advisors sometimes, have, I don't know, challenges working with physicians. What do you think that most financial advisors miss about working with physicians?
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of it is that physicians are by nature are smart and driven. I mean, you have to be to get there, right? So yeah, and they don't like to just give everything up, but their biggest resource, their scarcest resource is time. You know, they're typically very busy in their job, and so so those who come to financial advisors typically will do that because they don't want to spend their extra time outside of the hospital learning about finance, but they kind of still want to be educated about it. And so for me as a physician, I mean, I understand that. I speak their language. I understand their life and have been through their lifestyle, and I appreciate the fact that they're curious about money, and I love to educate them and give them the information that they want. And like we talked about before, just creating that teamwork and that collegial um, relationship. And I feel like I'm pretty fluent in both languages now. I mean, both medicine and finance, and so I kind of know what they don't know, and can help them fill in the holes of just their finance education, and and then help them manage their plan. I mean, it's one thing to know what you need to do, it's another thing to actually be able to do it and have the time to do it. And that's where I think having a partnership with a financial advisor can be really valuable, is that they can teach but also kind of help fill in the holes of all the things that you need to do to have a comprehensive plan.
That's awesome. And I think a great takeaway from that is really that applies across the board is understand what your clients are looking for and where they're coming from. I think, that's a great takeaway from this for any advisor. Um, and I think, for me, that was my takeaway is that, that's physicians are looking for certain things. They have, I mean, you can't throw everybody into one bucket by any means, but generally, they're smart, well educated, so there's certain things that they're hoping for or expecting.
Yeah.
So it's,
Well, and a lot of it too is, healthcare is a broad field, and physicians are, I mean, a lot of what you need and in terms of financial planning depends on your specialty and your work circumstances, especially, if we're doing any business planning for physicians. It's very different if you are a hospital employee versus running your own practice, or, owning a surgical center, or, looking for a buyout or a buy-in, or, there's lots of nuances within the medical finance space that it's good to have somebody who specializes in that in particular, so that they can help you understand that, because it's not all the same as, just a general finance client.
yeah, no, and I think that's great advice is, the majority of my consulting career is I ended up working with financial planners and wealth management advisors, handling their clients, but really my clientele was financial planners, and it made it easier because instead of having to learn all the different clients, which, was really their job, is I had to learn, what financial planners were expecting and what I could do that helped them the most with their clients. So I think that
Yeah.
specializing a little bit as an advisor is a great thing to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Because then you can really serve your clients. So, Brian, let's get into the next section of the podcast. And this is what I call the Get Ready questions. These are questions I ask all of my guests, and these are a little bit more rapid fire. The
Okay.
first one is, what basic money concept do you wish people knew?
How about a financial planning concept? I, I
That's
think I
great.
think I would say that financial planning is not just about picking investments. And I think a lot of people think that that's what their financial advisor's role is to, tell them what investments to choose and then hope to squeeze out a little bit more return. But I think that a good financial planner does so much more than that. In fact, that's a fairly small portion about what I do. I think it's more about understanding expenses, maximizing income opportunities, cash flow and budgeting and taxes and asset protection and educational savings and, estate planning and charitable giving. And, there's a lot within that's where you really get value, I think, out of your financial planner. And if you don't have that from your financial planner, I think you're missing out on some of that value.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful advice. Is that something I've observed is that financial planners, the good ones, do more than just pick investments in it. If you're calling yourself a financial planner and that's all you're doing, is you're not really
Yeah,
a financial planner.
right. You're
You're
an
just an
investment manager.
investment picker.
Yeah.
So that's great advice. So what basic money concept do you wish people knew?
Um, I think it's just about learning how to save. It's about saving a little bit more and investing it. Because that's what's really going to set you up for success. And so that's something that never should really go away. I mean, you should start early, but that should become part of your habit. And if you can develop that as a good habit, you're going to do really well.
That's awesome. So, um, and this is related. What is one habit that people can change when it comes to their money?
So, I mean, I think that's one is saving and investing. The other one is not to obsess about the ups and downs of the market. I think a lot of people, especially people who are trying to do any kind of investing on their own, um, they're watching the stock tickers, they're panicking, they're trying to predict what the market's going to do. They're doing all this kind of stuff, and really investing is for the long haul. And so if there's never been a 10-year period where the stock market has lost money. But there's plenty of 5-year periods that it has. And so, if you can invest it for the long haul, even if you put your money, just park it into an index fund that matches the market and you leave it alone, you're going to outperform the majority of money managers, professional money managers, and definitely most of the individual investors out there. So, it's really about being patient and being consistent.
That's awesome. And I don't remember now. I can't remember if it was Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett who said, the planned holding period for Berkshire Hathaway is forever.
Yeah.
When you're
Yeah. No,
investing.
those two guys are great examples of how to make it work, right? So I mean, they're obviously very smart investors, but I think both of them would say that their success is longevity.
Yeah, yeah,
Longevity and time in the market rather than timing the market. So it's really just about being consistent.
definitely, definitely. So I think that's a great takeaway. So Brian, what money myth are you trying to break?
I would say the money myth that I would try to break is that you have to be rich to be wealthy. And what I mean by that is being rich is really how much you make and how much you spend, but being wealthy is more about how much you save and how you invest it. So it's about the money the things that you don't buy with the money that you otherwise could have, right? And so to me, true wealth has little to do with money, actually, at least not directly. So if you're truly wealthy, you've actually bought back your time and you now have choices. And so, I like to think of true wealth, and at least in my definition, I have several categories, and one that says it's you enjoy what you do, and you work because you want to, not because you have to. Your assets work for you, not you for them. You have time and resources to explore hobbies. You have time for your family. You can retire when you want to, and you're able to give back. And so that's my definition of true wealth. And none of within that is a dollar figure, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So that's more of a life of flexibility and choice. And so that's what I'm shooting for. And you don't have to be rich to get there.
That's awesome. That's great advice. And I think, and for each of us, that's different.
Yeah,
What that,
exactly.
is symbolized by our goals. And so it really gets back to, what is that answer for you? What does
Yeah,
true wealth look like for you? And that is achievable for everyone.
right.
So the next question is, let's get out the time machine for a minute. What advice would you give your younger self if you could go back in time knowing what you know now about money?
Well, I would just say to my younger self to hold on and buckle up. It's going to be quite a ride, and not what you expected. I was always going into medicine and figured that would be my full career, and here I am, 30 years later as a financial planner. And so a lot of that is, just looking for opportunities and adding skills and being curious and um, you know, not being afraid to take a- an unexpected turn or a step. Sometimes that's given to you whether you want it or not, like in the case of the special needs. And sometimes it's a choice that you make. But for me, I would tell myself to not be afraid of those choices. And then, to just keep putting money in early. The earlier you do it, the better off you'll be.
I love that. And I think being curious is something I always talk about. Is that you need to be curious about your money. And I know you've mentioned that a couple times in working with clients, that is you do have to be curious. And advisors also need to be curious about their clients
Yeah.
and understanding who their clients are and what their clients are really trying to achieve. So curiosity, it's not going to kill the cat in this case. It's just a
Yeah,
good
it's a
thing.
good thing. It's a good thing.
So, what is your number one go-to favorite money resource, whether it's podcast, book, newsletter, app, or website?
Well, since I'm in the physician finance space, I tend to listen to kind of physician centric podcasts, and so White Coat Investor is a great one. That's the wonderful resource, lots of material, lots of information. Great for anybody to listen to because I think that there's some great, just basic finance stuff on there. But if you're a physician, they dive a lot more deeply into kind of some of the physician related things. Um, that's probably my number one. I also like Money Meets Medicine. That's another podcast by Jimmy Turner, who does a great job with personal finance things too. As a financial advisor, I like Kitces. Michael Kitces does a great job
Yeah.
with just teaching financial advisors how to be successful, and so I listen to him. My favorite book about money is actually The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. I think it's very great framework about just behavioral finance, and I think that area is super interesting to me because, really money, how we manage money is a lot about how we manage our behaviors and
Hmm.
and how we understand, and understanding our behaviors, you have to dive into your psychology and your history and all that kind of stuff a little bit. And the more you understand that, I think the easier that you can be successful.
Yeah, those are all wonderful resources. I mean, that's how um, we connected was through the White Coat
Yeah.
Investor. I'd urge everybody, whether or not, physicians are your market or you're a physician, to check out the White Coat Investor because there's a lot of really good content.
Yeah.
I'm more of a reader, so I don't listen to the podcast. I know that's horrible since I'm a podcaster, but I'm just, more of a visual learner. And
Same.
like you mentioned, the Nerd's Eye View blog is fantastic.
Yeah.
It covers a lot of things and very in depth. And White Coat Investor does go very in depth as well, which
Yeah.
is really cool.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming when you first jump on it. Just be if you're new to personal finance, just be aware that, there's a lot of content and
Yeah.
on there, and he puts out a blog post I think every day and has a podcast every week. So and he's been doing it for 11 years. So there's a lot of content there. So don't be overwhelmed by that, but just pick and choose the things that you need. I think there's some basic information on there too that can help you get started.
Yeah, 100%. And when there's something that's super physician related and you're not a physician, just wait for the next day.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
you can skip that. So to wrap up, what is your number one tip on changing the way we think about money?
I would say that money is a tool, not an end goal. So money, it helps you create that true wealth that I talked about. But once you've achieved that, you don't have to think about money anymore, which is a little ironic, so your goal is to not have to worry about money. And so the true value of money is that it helps you buy back your time. And it's really what you do with your time that makes you happy and successful. It's not how much money you have. It's really more about, you know, what kind of impact you're making in the world around you and what kind of relationships you're developing. And money can help you do that. There's no way around that. If you're constantly stressed about money and just trying to put food on the table, you're going to have a hard time thinking about anything else, right? So money's a tool for that, but it's not the end goal.
That's awesome. And you always hear that as, that when somebody is approaching the end, that they don't say, oh boy, I wish I'd worked more or earned more money or any of those things. It's about, like you said, is, the relationships that you created, the accomplishments that you had, or whatever, the
Right.
goals that you achieved. So, Bryan, where can people learn more about you, your practice, and what you're up to?
Well, so if you're interested in our practice, it's or becoming clients, our I work for Targeted Wealth Solutions. And so our website is targetedwealthsolutions.com. And so you can learn more about us or reach out to us about becoming financial planners for you. We also have a special needs page on that website. So for special needs planning, that's also the place to go. I'm also passionate about education. I've created a website that is kind of physician centric, but at this point, it's really mostly basic financial education. It's called Physician Finance Academy. So that's physicianfinanceacademy.com. Um, I've I've created a bunch of YouTube videos. There's probably 16, I think there's 16 videos. I've linked them on the website so they're easier to find, but you can also just search under that Physician Finance Academy on YouTube and you can find those. And those are all, kind of my road to true wealth, I guess, with basic finance and how to get where we're going and how to frame it in a way that, makes sense to me at least. So I have that. I'm actually almost done with a book on that
Okay.
same framework. I think I'm going to call it 12 Steps to True Wealth. We'll see. It'll
Yeah.
be it'll be
Nice.
out probably within the next month or two. So look for that. And I think that's about it for now. My partners and I are looking at starting a blog or maybe even a podcast here in the future, just kind of diving into some more of the physician centric conundrums. That's the idea. So we'll see how that goes, but stay tuned.
Yeah, that's awesome. And for everybody watching and listening, there'll be links to all of Bryan's resources as well as the other resources that he had mentioned, as always, in the show notes. So you can check all those out. So you don't have to keep going back and trying to get the URLs and everything. So, Bryan, thanks for joining us today on the Get Ready Money podcast. Appreciate your time.
Tony, I really appreciate it. It was a good conversation. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you everyone as always for tuning in to this episode of the Get Ready Money podcast. If you learned something today to change the way you think about money, please be sure to subscribe and to tell a friend. Until next time, let's change the way we think about money.